I didn't say a word during her entire presentation. And honestly, that's probably what scared everyone the most. Because while Melissa Grant stood there in front of 60 homeowners waving around violation notices like she was announcing federal indictments, I was sitting in the back row holding a folded property survey in my lap and realizing half the people in that room had spent years driving across land that legally belonged to me. The crazy part is, none of this started because I wanted power or money or revenge. It started because I filled a pothole. My name's Daniel Mercer. I'm 53 years old, retired structural engineer, divorced, one daughter in college, bad knee when it rains, pretty average guy honestly. 5 years ago, I moved into a neighborhood called Cedar Hollow outside Asheville, North Carolina because I wanted quiet. That's it. After my divorce, I was exhausted by conflict, exhausted by lawyers, exhausted by hearing my own voice raised in rooms where nobody was listening anyway. Cedar Hollow felt safe back then. Tree-lined streets, older homes, people who still waved from their porches, neighbors who borrowed ladders and actually returned them. And then Melissa moved in. Now listen, every neighborhood has that one person who treats the HOA like a branch of Homeland Security, but Melissa turned it into an Olympic sport. Early 40s, blonde highlights sharp enough to cut glass. Always walking around in spotless white sneakers like she floated instead of stepped. She sold luxury real estate and somehow managed to sound both fake-friendly and deeply threatening at the exact same time. Her husband, Gavin, was some corporate attorney who barely spoke unless it was to apologize for his wife with his eyes. At first, she started small. Complaint letters about trash bins being visible from the street. Arguments over mailbox paint shades. She once measured somebody's lawn with an actual tape measure while wearing yoga pants and sunglasses at 7 in the morning. Nobody liked her, but most people tolerated her because arguing with Melissa felt like accidentally subscribing to a problem you could never cancel. Then winter hit hard. The main road into Cedar Hollow, Briar Creek Lane, got destroyed. Asphalt cracked apart, potholes everywhere, chunks of pavement loose enough to kick up under tires. Every morning sounded like shopping carts crashing into dumpsters. One afternoon I watched old Mr. Delaney nearly lose his balance stepping around a crater, getting his mail, and something in me just snapped. I emailed the HOA board politely, offered to coordinate repairs. Hell, I even volunteered to cover labor if they approved materials. Melissa replied within 45 minutes. Unauthorized infrastructure modifications are strictly prohibited pending board review. Board review. That became her favorite phrase. 6 weeks passed. No meeting. No repairs. Nothing. Meanwhile, people were swerving around holes big enough to drown a bicycle in. So finally I called my friend Nate, who runs a paving company, and we fixed the worst sections ourselves over one long Saturday. Proper patchwork, sealed edges, quality material. Not some cheap hardware store nonsense. Cost me about $4,000 out of pocket, but the road looked good again. Safe again. And honestly, people were grateful. Neighbors brought coffee while we worked. One older woman hugged me. Kids stopped bouncing like pinballs inside their parents' SUVs every time they drove through the entrance. I made one mistake, though. I posted before and after photos in the neighborhood Facebook group. That Monday morning, I opened my front door and found a certified letter taped to it. Cease and desist. Melissa accused me of unauthorized roadway alteration and claimed I had endangered property values by using non-compliant surface textures, which I'm pretty sure was just rich people language for asphalt she didn't personally approve of. I laughed at first. Then I saw the fine amount. $500 immediately, plus $200 per day until the repairs were removed. Removed. She wanted me to destroy the road. I just fixed. The emergency HOA meeting happened 2 days later in the clubhouse, and I swear to God Melissa had turned the place into a courtroom. Projector screen, printed photos, highlighted documents, little red circles pointing at patched asphalt like she was investigating a serial killer. This resident, she said dramatically, refusing to even use my name, has shown reckless disregard for community standards. I remember looking around the room and seeing people avoiding eye contact because deep down everybody knew this was insane, but nobody wanted to become her next target. Then Melissa smiled at me. Not a normal smile, either. The kind of smile somebody gives right before they think they've buried you. What she didn't know, what nobody in that room knew yet, was that later that same week, an old widow named Eleanor Pike was about to hand me a dusty box of documents that would completely destroy Melissa's little kingdom from the inside out. Eleanor Pike lived 3 houses down from me in a little blue cottage covered in wind chimes and climbing roses. Sweet woman, late 70s, always smelled faintly like cinnamon and old books. Most people in Cedar Hollow barely noticed her anymore, which honestly says a lot about modern neighborhoods. People stop seeing anyone over 70 unless they're driving too slow in front of them. She knocked on my door around 8 that night, carrying a cardboard storage box with faded handwriting across the side. "Might want to look through these," she said quietly, before Melissa rewrites history completely. Inside were decades of HOA records, meeting notes, original development maps, covenant drafts, letters from the neighborhood's founders. Even old photographs from when Cedar Hollow was first built in the late 80s. Her husband, Walter, had been one of the original board members before he passed away. And that box changed everything. See, according to Melissa, the HOA had absolute authority over basically every blade of grass within neighborhood limits. But once I started digging through the paperwork, I realized most of the rules she enforced had never actually been approved properly. They'd been added over the years piece by different boards, usually during low-attendance meetings where barely anybody voted. The original HOA was shockingly reasonable. No abandonad vehículos. Keep noise down after 10. Don't turn your yard into a junkyard meth carnival. Basic stuff normal adults could agree on. Nothing about approved mailbox fonts. Nothing about grass height precision. Nothing about vehicle angle compliance in private driveways, which, yes, was somehow a real phrase Melissa once used while finding my daughter Olivia for parking crooked during Thanksgiving break. The deeper I looked, the stranger things got. One document referenced Briar Creek Lane not as a public access road, but as a privately retained infrastructure parcel. That wording bothered me. Engineer brain, I guess. Certain phrases itch at you until you scratch them open. So Friday morning, I drove downtown to the county records office. If you've never spent 8 hours inside one of those places, imagine the smell of dust, coffee stains, and quiet disappointment mixed together under fluorescent lights. I started tracing ownership records. Cedar Hollow Development Corporation transferred assets after bankruptcy in 1998. Then something called Blue Summit Holdings acquired remaining infrastructure parcels. Then Blue Summit dissolved in 2004. And that's when my stomach dropped, because the transfer recipient listed underneath was Mercer Land and Access, LLC. Mercer, my last name. I remember just staring at the screen for a solid 10 seconds, thinking there had to be some mistake. My uncle Raymond had been a small-time investor years ago, mostly forgotten family history at this point. Quiet guy, never married, died in 2019, and left me a pile of paperwork I'd shove into storage without really sorting through. Suddenly, I couldn't get home fast enough. I spent that entire weekend sitting on my garage floor, surrounded by boxes, breathing in 30 years of paper dust and old receipts, while Olivia sat nearby, helping me sort folders. "You seriously keep all this?" She laughed, holding up ancient tax documents. Apparently hereditary hoarding runs in the family. Then, around midnight Saturday, I found it. Original deed, transfer documentation. Briar Creek Lane private roadway easement ownership assigned to Mercer Land and Access, LLC. Transferred through Raymond Mercer Estate Holdings after probate settlement. I actually said "holy hell" out loud. Olivia thought somebody had died. Turns out the entire neighborhood's only entrance road legally belonged to me. Not the HOA. Not the county. Me. And suddenly, every insane interaction with Melissa replayed differently in my head. Every violation notice, every threat, every smug lecture about unauthorized road maintenance. She had been fining me for repairing my own property. Now look, I know how this sounds. Like one of those fake internet revenge stories where the hero suddenly discovers a hidden kingdom under his basement or something. I didn't believe it either. So Monday morning, I hired a real estate attorney named Carlin Nguyen to verify everything before I said a single word publicly. Her office overlooked downtown Asheville and smelled like expensive coffee in leather folders. She reviewed the documents for maybe 20 minutes before leaning back in her chair with this expression that was halfway between impressed and deeply entertained. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "unless there's fraud somewhere in the chain, you absolutely own that road." I just blinked at her. She continued, calm as ever. "The HOA appears to have operated under the assumption that Briar Creek Lane was public use infrastructure. Legally speaking, it isn't." I remember laughing then. Not because it was funny exactly, more because 6 months of stress suddenly felt unreal. Carla explained the implications carefully. Since the neighborhood depended entirely on that road for access, I couldn't simply block residents overnight without legal consequences. Existing usage rights mattered. Emergency services mattered. But maintenance authority? Control? Usage agrément? Those belong to me. And here's the thing people misunderstand about power. Real power usually arrives very quietly. No dramatic music. No lightning strike. Just a calm realization that the person screaming at you actually has far less control than they think. Melissa, meanwhile, had no idea any of this was happening. She escalated instead. My fines jumped from $8,000 to nearly $23,000 in less than 2 weeks. She started driving past my house constantly in her white Range Rover, slowing down to photograph tiny violations. She cited me because my garbage can was visible from one angle near the driveway. She reported me to the county over unapproved drainage modifications that literally did not exist. Then she crossed a line that changed something in me permanently. One afternoon, Olivia called me furious because Melissa had approached her directly outside the mailbox cluster. My daughter was 20 years old. Melissa told her, "Your father's selfishness is hurting this community." That sentence sat inside me like poison, because suddenly it wasn't about potholes anymore. It wasn't even about the HOA. It was about humiliation, control. The kind of small-minded power trip that feeds on people staying quiet because conflict feels exhausting. And maybe if I'd been the man I was right after my divorce, tired, numb, disconnected from everything, maybe she would have won. But something about seeing my daughter upset flipped a switch inside me. So instead of fighting emotionally, I got systematic. I installed cameras, documented every interaction, built spreadsheets comparing selective enforcement violations across the neighborhood. Melissa's friends had identical infractions she ignored completely. Oversized planters, visible trash bins, illegal fence heights. I tracked all of it. And while I was quietly building evidence, Melissa made the biggest mistake of her life. She scheduled a public community accountability meeting and invited local media because she planned to make an example out of me in front of the entire county. What she didn't realize was that I had already ordered professional survey markers for the road boundaries, private property signage sitting in my garage, and a folder containing documents capable of detonating her entire authority structure in one single afternoon. And by the time that meeting arrived, I wasn't scared of her anymore. Honestly, I think that's the moment she should have been scared of me. The community accountability meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon at the Cedar Hollow Clubhouse, and by the time I pulled into the parking lot, it already looked like a small-town political rally gone wrong. Cars lined both sides of Briar Creek Lane, neighbors clustered together whispering, and Melissa stood near the entrance wearing a cream-colored blazer like she was about to announce a Senate campaign instead of publicly humiliating a retired engineer over asphalt repairs. The local news station showed up too. That's when I realized she truly believed she was going to win. I sat in the back row quietly while Melissa launched into a 20-minute presentation filled with enlarged photos of patched potholes, violation notices, and dramatic phrases like community sabotage and threats to property stability. At one point, she actually held up a ruler and said, "Rules exist for a reason," like she was delivering the Gettysburg Address to a room full of exhausted homeowners. People looked uncomfortable, not angry, not supportive, just tired. That's the thing about bullies. Eventually they stop sounding powerful and start sounding repetitive. Then Melissa looked directly at me and smiled. "Mr. Mercer," she said sweetly, "before we proceed with legal enforcement, would you like to explain your behavior to the community?" You could feel the room tighten. Honestly, 5 months earlier I probably would have gotten defensive, raised my voice, tried to explain myself emotionally. Instead, I stood up calmly, carried my folder to the front table, and unfolded the survey map across the podium. The room went silent instantly. Not polite silence either, the kind where people stop breathing for a second. I looked around slowly before speaking. "Before we discuss unauthorized road repairs," I said, "I think we should clarify who actually owns the road." Melissa's smile disappeared so fast it almost looked painful. I laid out the deed transfer documents beside the survey maps, while Carla, my attorney, handed copies to the county official standing near the back wall. The surveyor I'd hired confirmed the parcel boundaries in front of everyone. Briar Creek Lane, private property, owned by Mercer Land and Access, LLC, owned by me. For a few seconds, nobody spoke at all. You could hear the low hum of the projector fan and somebody nervously tapping a coffee cup. Then people started murmuring. "What do you mean private? Wait, seriously? You're telling me the HOA doesn't own the road?" Melissa jumped in immediately. "These documents are misleading," she snapped. "This is clearly some kind of manipulation attempt." But her voice had changed. Less confident now. Sharper. Desperate around the edges. Carla stayed calm. "The ownership chain is fully verified through county records," she explained. "Mr. Mercer has legal maintenance authority over Briar Creek Lane." One older man actually laughed out loud. Not because it was funny exactly, more because the entire situation had become absurd. Melissa stared at me with this expression I'll probably never forget. Pure disbelief mixed with humiliation. Like reality itself had personally betrayed her. And honestly, part of me almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered Olivia standing by those mailboxes while Melissa lectured her about my selfishness, and the sympathy disappeared real quick. I addressed the room carefully. "For years, I've maintained portions of this road out of pocket because I thought it helped the community," I said. "I'm not interested in revenge, and I'm not trying to make anybody's life harder. I'm offering a simple cooperative agreement. Shared maintenance costs, full transparency, professional upkeep." I explained the proposal clearly. $40 per household each month. Road maintenance, snow removal, drainage repair, reserve funding for future resurfacing. No heathen fees. Open accounting. Basically the opposite of everything Melissa had turned the HOA into. And here's the funny part. The second people realized there was finally a fair solution on the table, the entire emotional temperature of the room changed. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in months suddenly started talking again. Questions replaced accusations. Meanwhile, Melissa completely unraveled. "This is extortion," she shouted. "He's holding the neighborhood hostage." But even her supporters looked uncertain now, because deep down, everybody knew the truth. I had never threatened anyone. I fixed the road. She declared war over it. Then came the final blow, and honestly, I hadn't even planned on mentioning it publicly. But Melissa kept pushing, kept yelling, kept calling me fraudulent. So finally I looked at her, and said quietly, "Would you also like me to explain why your husband's law firm received contractor referral payments from 3 HOA enforcement vendors?" That hit like a grenade. Complete silence. Melissa froze. Gavin, sitting near the wall, suddenly looked physically ill. Turns out Olivia had uncovered emails connecting Melissa's approved contractors to referral kickbacks routed through Gavin's legal consulting business. Nothing criminal proven yet, but enough ethical smoke to make everyone in that room deeply uncomfortable. Melissa tried to interrupt me, but the crowd had already turned. Not aggressively. Worse, people stopped listening to her. And when a person like Melissa loses control of the room, they collapse fast. She grabbed her purse, muttered something about lawsuits, and stormed out of the clubhouse while cameras followed behind her. Gavin lingered for maybe 5 awkward seconds before quietly walking after his wife, without making eye contact with anyone. The door slammed shut behind them. And just like that, it was over. Or at least the ugly part was. 6 months later, Cedar Hollow barely feels like the same neighborhood. 38 households joined the road cooperative. We resurfaced the remaining damaged sections professionally, added proper drainage, and even installed new lighting near the entrance. Eleanor's Rose Garden won Community Landscape of the Month, which still makes me smile. Kids ride bikes outside again. Neighbors wave again. Nobody carries rulers around measuring grass anymore. Melissa and Gavin listed their house 3 months after the meeting and moved to Charlotte. Last I heard, Gavin's firm was quietly settling several ethics complaints related to HOA contracting practices. And me? Honestly, I learned something I didn't expect. Most bullies survive because decent people get tired before they do. That's their whole strategy. Exhaust everybody until silence feels easier than resistance. But sometimes all it takes is one person calmly refusing to back down, and suddenly everyone else remembers they were never powerless to begin with. So now I'm curious, if you found out your HOA had been abusing its authority for years, would you fight back publicly like I did, or would you just move away and protect your peace? Because trust me, after everything that happened in Cedar Hollow, I still don't know which answer is smarter.